Hello and welcome to another live stream from Truth Proof Towers. And welcome to the show, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Les. And another Thursday. So excellent. It's great to be here with you. And I'm really looking forward to speaking to our guest tonight, Trey Hudson.
Really looking forward to that one as well, Paul. That'd be fantastic.
I think what it is there's so many similarities to what he's working on, to what we're doing here in East Yorkshire and beyond, kind of thing. So yeah, we'll not open it up just yet. But yeah, what's your week been like?
Well, actually, I picked up a little bit of information, and it might not seem anything, but I think that that UFO still that we posted on the interactive the other week, which was supposed to be from inside the plane, obviously, to a UFO passing, and it only appears in about 5 frames of the video. I think it's been proven it's a hoax, Paul.
Ah, well,
so if anybody can put any more meat on that one, that'd be all right. But yeah, that's the one we did talk about in our interactive. I think it was last Sunday or the Sunday before. But yeah.
Well done, Les. I mean, we shouldn't be disappointed, should we? That's what it's all about. But it's that tiny percentage that we know is the real deal that we're interested in. So let's just have a quick look in this chat then. And thanks for supporting us, guys. So we got Annie French Boynton, Simon Riley, Margaret Webster, Chris Mack, Fred Flintstone, Drew Hollings, Rebecca King, Awake, Patrick Daniel. I keep saying I'm going to speak to Patrick, and I really need to. We've got to have that conversation. James Miller, Matt Clinchley, Ralph Winter, Al Durham. Hey, good to see you, Ralph. And good to see you, Al. And Rivington Pike Beast, we know who that is. That's Lee, Karen Behrman, Jojo, Susan. We could do this all night. Hi, Zoe, is it? So Valdemir. Can you see any more, Les?
Yeah, did you get Beer Monster?
Beer Monster.
Tonight, yeah. And
I think it's always good to have a Beer Monster on team.
Did you get Nuki Brown in? Nuki Brown and
Gordon Carrick, the guy Gordon. Simon.
Drew Hollins, yeah.
And I'm sure Lynn is in, and Pete will be listening, and I know Bob were in earlier, and I think Lorraine will be in. So I think we better get on with it, don't you?
Yeah. So I've got to say, for everybody who's new to the show, please, if you're liking the content, like and subscribe, and like the video for tonight. Even if you are subscribed, that really helps us along. Helps the YouTube algorithms to just push the channel further up, Paul.
And tonight, if you've got any questions, because I'm sure our guest Trey Hudson will enjoy answering these questions, please put them in capital letters, and Les will do his best to get most of the questions out for you, on hour or just before. So let's go.
So without then, I'll disappear into the background, come back when there's any questions, and we'll bring a guest on, Paul. We'll see you a bit later.
Hello, Trey. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm great. It's a wonderful, beautiful weather here on this side of the pond, and everything just absolutely glorious.
Yeah, well, as you can see, I've been stuck in sun a little bit myself today, but I'm not complaining. So you've been on before. I think it's probably a year ago now, but for those that don't know, Trey Hudson, absolutely amazing researcher into an area of high strangeness that's called the South Skinwalker Ranch, author of the book The Meadow Project, and former security specialist within the government, served for his country, and now a researcher of all things strange and unusual. So welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. You talked about my previous career. What I tell people is that was my job, my job. That's what paid the bills. But now that I'm retired, I'm doing my real vocation, which is, researching, like you said, all things high strangeness, and sticking my toe into that, that at times that tepid pool of weirdness, that exists all around us, but very few people have either the inclination or the time to really explore it.
So prior to retirement then, Trey, did you always think to yourself, because you've obviously had this interest, did you always think, when I retire, that's going to allow me loads of time, I'm going to get heavily involved in this, heavily invested?
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because, that's what I told my coworkers, or my staff that worked under me. I said, I'm going to, pretty much be doing this stuff full time. and really dedicating, getting the story out there. And that's what I tell people is, my experiences, the experiences of my team. It's not for me, it's not for my team, it's the world's experiences. It's should be shared. The only thing that I'm reluctant and I will not share is the exact location, which is understandable. But I want everybody to enjoy these experiences, and learn something from it, and maybe have that little spark of curiosity lit in them that they can go out and find these high strangeness places, in their own neighborhood or in the adjacent forest, near their home or something like that. Because, what I tell folks, repeatedly is the world is much, much stranger than you've been told.
Absolutely, and you've kind of hit the nail on the head there, because already this, that when you're reaching out to these other people, that there's loads of pockets of areas that produce this strange phenomena that really aren't being exposed because there's not the researchers, there's not the interest in the area. I mean, before we jump into how you stumbled on this location, if stumbled's the word, can we just have a little bit of background about Trey Hudson?
Yeah, I really nothing extraordinary. I grew up in the Atlanta, Georgia area, which is in the southeast United States. It's a big metro area, big city. And my father always had kind of an interest, in this kind of stuff. And I remember, as a young boy, he would travel around the country and would listen to late night radio shows quite a bit. And one of the shows that he was listening to had a gentleman on it who was touting his new book. And the gentleman's name was Brad Steiger. And this is the book.
Gods of Aquarius.
Gods of Aquarius. And so my father, bought the book, and, just being, kind of interested in that stuff as a kid, watching, UFO shows on TV, In Search of with Leonard Nimoy, and, some of the Gary Anderson stuff, Space 1999 and UFO and all of that stuff. So I read this book and I'm like, this is just really fascinating stuff. So that kind of sparked the interest. When other kids would ask their parents for magazines about American football or basketball, I wanted the UFO magazines or the Bigfoot magazines.
Right,
that was me. And so it just became an interest of mine. I went to university. I studied under Dr. William Roll, the famous parapsychologist here in the U.S. And so that was kind of the flavor of the psychology department where I went to university. So, and then life got in the way of living. I graduated, college, had to do my military commitment, and life got boring, and so in the mid. Oh, sorry, go on.
So do you have a degree in psychology?
Yes. Yeah, humanistic and transpersonal psychology.
How does that, it won't clash, but how does that affect when you're listening to people relay their stories of the strange and unusual then? How does it help or hinder? In which hat do you wear?
It absolutely helps. And I was actually talking to a pretty big name in ufology last night. We had about a 2-hour conversation. And he was saying that he thinks the strides in this are not necessarily going to come from the hard science folks. And this guy's a scientist.
Yeah.
He says he thinks it's going to come from the folks with background in psychology, and parapsychology. That's really where the rubber meets the road. But, my type of degree is in humanistic and transpersonal psychology, which really focuses on the experiential nature of being a human being in the world around us. How does a human being interact with people, the environment, and the phenomena that surrounds us every day? And that's something that I tell people is, you can collect as much empirical data as you want, which I think is very important. I do it. But if you don't have human beings living that experience, then what's the point? Why even bother? Why is it even important if human beings aren't interacting with the phenomena? So, it allows me to, to interact with, experiencers, to, use certain techniques like the cognitive interviewing technique, which is a type of interviewing technique. And I think it makes a more, in my opinion, a more well-rounded, examination of the phenomena.
So with that skill set, then, when you're listening to somebody relay an encounter, an experience, because obviously you'll be noting some of this in a different way to what Joe Public would, perhaps. Are you noticing a certain type of person is experiencing these things, or is it just the full spectrum of society?
It seems to be the full spectrum of society. You do have, one group of people that, for whatever reason, due to their upbringing, their culture, whatever, is they have very narrow, I call it the toilet paper tube phenomena. They have a very narrow tube they look at the world through, and that tube could be culture, religion, vocation, whatever. And they very rarely bring the tube down and kind of look around them to get the full experience. Those people will quickly take an event of high strangeness and put it into their normalcy box. Okay.
Yeah.
They have a very strong normalcy bias. That can't have been, an unidentified craft. That had to be an aircraft. Well, maybe it's not. Or I didn't really experience that entity in my living room. It was, a migraine coming on, or, they'll try to rationalize it.
Yeah.
Often at their own expense, in the expense of the experiential nature of what's going on. But then you have other people that are a little bit more open-minded, that are like, wow, this experience is happening. I'm unnerved by it, but let me try to capture as much of it as I can. And because they're not so mired into their, into their culture, background, or whatever, they're actually willing to step out and talk to people. Now, I was going to go do an interview with another team member of a gentleman that experienced like 9 hours of missing time. And, we had it set up. We were going to drive over to an adjacent state and talk to this gentleman. And right at the last moment, these people, and I know you've experienced, they'll pull back, I don't want to talk about it. So that's part of it too. So yeah, it's kind of a crapshoot, on what kind of folks you get.
So sometimes, I've said this before, that the explanations and reasons that science and academia put forward to explain something away are more ridiculous than the actual account and story itself, no matter how hard these things are to believe. But what about family members, Trey? Have any of your family members experienced this? And am I right? There's two things here. I'm just going to hit you with this one as well. Did you start off looking into spirits and hauntings?
Yeah. That's my background. Like I said, studying under Dr. Roll, he was a parapsychologist. So that's kind of, I tell people I started off as a ghost guy, and I would, do your typical, go into an area and I'd have my, my tri-field meter and, my IR cameras and, doing EVPs, ITC instrumental transcommunications and all of that. And I, have a pretty solid background in that. And then I started. Oh, sorry.
No, it's me butting in. I should be sorry. When did you jump then or when did you see it all merging into all the other elements?
Well, that's really interesting because we started, actually the Meadow started off as initially a outside, in the environment, paranormal investigation. That's what started it, as I was tracking down Folklore and found some references of a haunted road in this particular area. And we didn't find anything on the haunted road, as often happens. But back at base camp, my base camp operator had an amazing UAP experience, just phenomenal. And we decided the Meadow, which was a large field, probably about a quarter of a mile, half a mile from our base camp, would be a good place to research because this area also happened to have a lot of Bigfoot reports, ghost sightings, and UFOs. It was all like concentrated in this very tight region. I'm talking maybe 20 miles, this region. And so we started experiencing this stuff. And I kind of started to have an epiphany that, the old way of looking at this stuff in its well-defined shoots, your ufology shoot, your cryptology shoot, and your ghost shoot, is kind of a stupid way of looking at it. and I'm sorry if I hurt anybody's feelings, but it's
No,
very,
I
very
agree.
limiting. And I thought, what if all of this phenomena is like this different facets of one diamond? And then my thoughts on that have evolved, well beyond taking into interdimensional aspects of phenomena. And I think that we just have to take the phenomena for what it is. And, I think you talked about in your lecture that a ufologist will see a UFO, cryptozoologist will see, a Bigfoot or something, and a ghost person will see a ghost. Well, what if they're all seeing the same thing?
Yeah.
That they're just taking their biases and trying to mold it into their understanding of the phenomena.
Fit it into what they kind of want it to be. It's brilliant that there's so many researchers and people interested now that are actually not understanding it, that's probably the wrong word, but realizing this. Yeah. And so you've not exactly moved away from the ghosts, the spirits, the hauntings, because it's all part of it.
Right.
But,
something kind of cool I've done is I've taken some of the best practices from I hate the term ghost hunting, but the ghost hunting world, and I bring them over and apply them to the meadow. So we will do instrumental transcommunication, and we've had some amazing results. We do ghost box sessions. We do that kind of stuff, EVPs, which some people think is kind of weird trying to bring to the forefront to address an area of high strangeness, but I think it's astonishingly appropriate because it's just another way of looking at the same phenomena.
So can you give us an example then of using, because I'm not really that familiar with the ghost box, and I know that some people have said that it's just throwing out random words and it's like an apparatus that's loaded with words. But from someone with experience and someone who's used these things, there's probably better ones to use. Can you give us an example of where this is you and your team feel this has worked?
Oh, absolutely. And I'll explain a little bit about what the phenomena is, and then I'm going to read some stuff that we did from a ghost box session. There's a type of ghost box thing that we use called the Estes protocol. And everybody, listening has probably seen the shows where they have a ghost box and it's just, static, and you get like a little fragment of a word and static. What you do is you take that ghost box and you connect the external speaker jack to a set of headphones, and then you put shooting muffs over those headphones. So the only thing the person can hear is what's coming through the ghost box, and then you blindfold them. So they have no idea of what external stimuli is out there. They have no idea of what questions are being asked. And then you start asking questions. So you have a interrogator and a receiver, person asking questions, a person answering, but they're disconnected, So, I'll give you an idea. This is a session we did. I asked, do you want to interact with us? Are you of this dimension? And the answer was yes. Are you from an extraterrestrial help? Are you from an extraterrestrial area? Are you of this earth? Once. Where are you now? Land. Are you speaking of this land that we're on now? Are there more than one of you? Are you responsible for the portals, which, if you remember, we had talked about earlier, the cube or the portal that we experienced? And the answer was likely. Do you use these portals for transportation? Yes. Are the portals open to us? No. Are they dangerous? No. May we enter the portals? Once. And we did actually step into the portal once. And so, when you take it in whole and you look at the video of this session, it appears, statistically that we are actually interacting with an intelligence or an other, and that there is a two-way conversation. What really was interesting about that session is when I started.
We've just lost Trey for a moment, but no doubt he will be back if you can hear us.
Okay.
Yep. So what was interesting is when you started, that's where I couldn't hear you from.
Oh, okay. What part did you not pick up?
You'd just done the session, and you said what was interesting is when
Oh, okay. What was interesting is when I started asking during the session about specific physical phenomenologies, plasma energy, magnetic waves, gravitational forces, trying to really break down the nuts and bolts of the phenomena. The entity seemed to get anxious, and a bit haughty, with us. Like, we were maybe treading into an area that, it did not want us to go to. So, but bringing that type of, that type of methodology, from the ghost hunting world, the paranormal research world, and applying it to this, yields results. And it's that kind of outside the box thinking that will really further, all of our endeavors, at these areas of high strangeness.
Honestly, it's so interesting, and it's something that probably we ought to be trying. We've used tri-field meters, EMF meters, and had results. It seems to have responded to questions. So why not that? So when you set this up, and I don't want to labor on this because I'm sure people want to hear about some of the real sort of exciting, I don't know, figures that have been seen, shadow beings. But when you set this up, this is just for me, this people, sorry. But so when you set this up, the guy with the earphones on, how far away is he from the guy asking the questions?
Usually just so we can do it, catch everybody in one frame, with our camera,
right.
Maybe 10 feet.
But there's just no way he can hear you. No, that's right then. So obviously you're researching, and we've got this area called the Meadow Project. So you're working in this area. You'd gone in ghost hunting. What other strange phenomena sort of did it hit you right away? Did it take months? Did it dissipate over time, and then you took different people in, and it seems to activate a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. Once we really started focusing on the meadow, which is about an 8-acre forest field, like a mountain meadow. Once we really started focusing on that area, it was almost immediately. I mean, like the first time that we went out, it was July of 2016. We had missing time. We had one of our team members that was observed turning into a orb or ball of energy, moving from point A to point B at extremely, inhuman speeds. We had odd tracks on a team member's GPS showing him being places that he never went.
Why don't we, unless you don't want to trail, why don't we start with missing time?
Yeah.
Just walk us through that, please. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, that was the only incident that we have been able to really lock down with missing time. Missing time isn't something we usually experience, but on this particular incident, we were going to have a team member run across the top of a ridge, which is adjacent to the meadow, and see if he could flush anything down into the meadow that we could capture with our thermals and our night vision and all of that. Well, he had forgot his radio. So he said, while we were heading out there, he said, "Hey, I'm going to go back to base camp, get my radio, and I'll meet up with you and radio when I start walking this ridge to let you know that I'm active, I'm moving." And he came over the radio and he said, "Hey, I just arrived at the tree across the trail, which is a known landmark." And he said, "I don't remember how I got here." And so, our medic on the team, he immediately thought that maybe he was having some sort of, medical emergency, stroke or a concussion or something like that. So my medic got on the radio and said, "Hey, can you feel both sides of your body? Or is there any tingling in your extremities?" No. Are you dizzy? Well, no. Do you have a headache? No. Recite Mary Had a Little Lamb to see if there was any slurring of speech. None of that. He says, "I just don't remember how I got here." And this is where our normalcy bias pops in. We said, "Oh, well, obviously he was thinking about the mission and
just got caught up in it and just
lost track of time," and which was a very stupid thing to do, but in hindsight. And so that was the first incident of missing time. Now we don't know exactly when he first lost time. But it was probably about 20 minutes of missing time. But what gets really interesting, and this is something that, is still, it fascinates me to this day, is this guy that this happened to is a veteran backcountry search and rescue guy. He's like a mountain rescue guy. And he always runs his breadcrumb setting on his GPS that always shows his track line, whenever he moves. Well, the next morning he came over to it and he goes, "Hey, everybody, I want you to see something." And he pulls up his GPS, and his track line shows him being on the other side of a small river, yet he was never wet. It also shows him doing straight line routes over terrain that you can't travel in a straight line.
Yeah. That's impossible.
Well, it is possible.
Not impossible. Surely it's impossible to travel in a straight line, surely.
Oh, no, it's possible.
Oh, right.
If you're in the air.
Yeah, you got you. Well, that's what I'm meaning, kind of thing.
So,
not on foot. You're not going to travel.
No, not on foot. Absolutely not. So it's like, wow, missing time. And then we have these track lines, and it gets even more interesting, but because we said, hey, go home, download those files. And most of, quite a few of the team members had the software that could pull up those track lines and do an analysis of it and send us those files so we can really look into it. By the time he got home, everything was erased off his GPS. It's as though it never existed. But we saw it. Multiple people saw his track lines on his GPS when he pulled it up to show us.
Yeah, that's not something unheard of, though, is it? People have had things on their devices that have suddenly been erased or disappeared. I've no idea how that could work, but I would not disbelieve that for a second. Oh, so, okay. I mean, I spoke to a fisherman, because I'm literally 200 yards from North Sea here, who had advanced time, and they'd got a chart plotter on their boat tray. And it showed that they knew where they were going, from Bridlington Harbour to Flamborough Head to certain wrecks where they were going to do some fishing. And they got to fishing grounds an hour and a half early. And he said the plotter just showed a gap, as though we'd not done it. I mean, it really, really strange. I mean, advanced times probably, I don't know. That might be one that's going to happen. It's strange how when you talk about these things, do you know what I mean? You're almost igniting something.
Right.
What about coincidence then? Just a bit random, I know, but have you spoke about things and things have happened while you've been there?
Oh, you'll love this story. This is, and I'm going back into my notes now. This was in May of 2023, so this was not that long ago. Is we started using something called a God helmet, which is also known as a Corin helmet.
Steve Mirror been using that.
Right. And so we have ours is actually set up that it's field deployable. We don't need any outside power or anything. So what we've been doing is taking that device, and you can only use it so many times, like once a month. So what we've been doing is taking select members, putting them through a God helmet session prior to us starting our research, but while still out in the field, and seeing if that will supercharge or excite the environment for phenomena. And what's in May of 2023. Like I said, we had several people, go through the God helmet session, and we had gone out into the meadow, and we had two new team members with us. We have a psychoanalyst on our team now, and his wife. And I sent them with my most senior researcher, and they were going to do the same thing, run across the top of the ridge and then work their way back. And so they worked their way all the way to the east end of the ridge. And the wife, was hearing faint voices, very low, mumbly kind of voices. And she says, "I'm not comfortable here. I'm not comfortable here. Is that, I'm sorry, but I'm not." And my researcher said, "That's fine. That's not a big deal. If you're not comfortable, we don't want you to be somewhere where you're not comfortable."
Are you in? Is this radio contact or the person?
Yeah. We that's one of our protocols is everybody has, communications, with base camp, our net control officer, and also with other team members.
Yeah.
So, it radioed to me and they said, "Hey, Christy is feeling uncomfortable. We're going to head back and meet you at the end of the meadow." So they started doing that. And as they were moving back, she says, I just keep getting this feeling that something is low and slinking along the ground. And she described it as almost being like Gollum, from the, Lord of the Rings, from Tolkien's, books, slinking around, lurking. And the team member I was with down in the meadow, we could look up at the ridge and we could see their headlamps, moving across the ridge. But what's interesting is just below them, out of their side of view, was an orb that was tracking them. Yeah. Just below them, but they couldn't see it from their angle. So, something did appear to be, slinking along with them.
She'd picked up on something then, obviously.
Right. So, the voices got louder that night, very, very loud. And so we all came back and she had a dream. Now I am a pretty big believer now that the others, can communicate with us through mind speak and dreams. That's been, in our case. And so she said she had a dream that she and her husband had retired to their tent, and the top of the tent became translucent, and there was a woman and a young male looking down at her, and they said, "Hey, we want to show you something." So they were brought up to a room that was all white, and it had like a big whiteboard on it, and the woman started writing things on it. And these were the symbols, because she woke up the next morning and she keeps a dream diary, usually as a course of action. She wrote these symbols down. And you can see those.
I can, yeah.
So, she came to me the next morning. She just says, do these symbols mean anything to you? Shay, her husband, said, I need to talk to you. I said, okay. Of course, I wasn't going to, show her my poker hand. I kept a straight face and I said, "How familiar are you with our work here?" Because I'm not, came along with my husband. "Have you heard any podcast or read any of my books or anything?" "No, not at all." And I said, "The thing is, the spiral is incredibly significant because that is often a symbol used in pictographs or petroglyphs to indicate an opening or a doorway to another dimension, especially the Americas." I said, "What's even more interesting is the one spiral was like a box."
Yeah, and then the circular one, weren't they, as well?
And the portal or gateway that we experienced was a box or a cube. And then the last one was that square type portal with an all-seeing eye in it. So, we got pretty excited about that. That's, was amazing. Yeah. Especially she had no knowledge of, our work prior and didn't understand the symbology, of the spiral, meaning, a gateway or a doorway.
So is this, sorry, no, carry on. Sorry.
Oh, so turn the page. The next night we go back out. And during that evening, one of my thermal operators, we had been discussing, indigenous wildlife, in that area. During the day, he captured on his thermal, or saw on his thermal rather, a entity or a creature that he assumed was a boar, like a wild boar, or a bear, or a large cat, like a cougar, moving across the meadow, slinking along the ground. And when we got back and did our debrief, and I said, "Tell me about that," and he described it. And I said, "Lee, think about it. We were in an open field with a dozen people surrounding it. What animal would ever walk across an open field where it can, at a minimum, get the scent of at least one team?" Yeah. No animal would do that. I said, "What did Christy talk about last night?" And he goes, "Oh, something slinking along the ground." He goes, "Crap. That was it, wasn't it?" And I said, "Yeah." But he, jumped into his normalcy box and said, "Oh, that must be a bear or a large, boar. I'm not going to bother to hit record because I don't want to run my battery down." So, it does. It's, it's evolving. This phenomenon definitely is evolving.
Well, you talked about a cube, a square. Just briefly touch on the fact there's a certain area where we're working, and that's got to be the word for it. Because you don't spend hours up there and it's not pleasurable at times because the weather's that adverse. But we've seen squares of light. Have you seen anything like similar circles of light, squares of light? And I don't mean moving like we talk about the light form. I'm talking about
we've
like
experienced it several times. The initial time was in 2017, where one of my thermal operators started seeing these boxes or cubes, appear over here in the meadow and then wink out, and then appear over here and then wink out, appear over here and then wink out. And we were actually able to dispatch a team into the area where the thing had been previously and had winked out. And they experienced the phenomena where it was very quiet. It was almost like they were in a cone, very black, very dark.
During this period of the box.
Yes, and the temperature dropped.
So we've got this like lower silence, this strange descent. Yeah. Okay.
And so about a year later is we had gone back out to the meadow one morning, and there were, I'm not going to say they're crop circles because they weren't circular, but they were like track lines, about 8 inches wide, parallel. And what it looked like, I'm not saying this is what it was, but it looked like something was dropped down, traveled a distance, and then was lifted out. It was, the grass was, probably about that high.
Yeah.
And the grass in these track lines was bent over. It wasn't broken. And inside of the track line, there were ant hills, mole hills, and very small saplings that were not compressed.
So it's just gone over them.
Yeah.
Dropped the grass, but gone over, yeah.
So bent it down. So the team members went out there and they had a full spectrum camera, that also records infrared and ultraviolet.
Yeah.
And so they're standing inside of this track line and they bring their camera up and there's a cube only visible on full spectrum. They bring it down, nothing, bring it up. There it is. Step out of the track line, no cube. Step back into the track line. There it is again. So it was like a very narrow, almost like a gun sight. You had to stand inside of these tracks and look down. And so my team member went to take a photograph of it, and the SD card for the camera was back at camp. He forgot to
that was going to be my next question. Did you get photographic evidence?
Yeah. So, and you've researched, enough to know that these things happen.
God, yeah.
And so, those were two instances of, boxes or cubes. Now, you go and you look at boxes and cubes. Some of the earliest representations by the alchemist of something called the prima materia or prime material was represented by a box or a cube. And you can look at early engravings from the Renaissance era, and it shows boxes or cubes flying through the air that's supposed to be this prime material. If you go into the book of Revelations, the New Jerusalem is supposed to be a box or a cube.
Right.
Katie Page talks about boxes or cubes at her Colorado location. Skinwalker Ranch in Utah talks about boxes or cubes or flying refrigerators. The Chupa Chupas in Brazil were flying boxes or cubes. So there's something, special about that particular shape
and similarities. What obviously you're experiencing lots of things in this location, but for the most part, is it good or is it bad, or is it a mixture of it all? I mean, you talk about the team, and you're really fortunate. I mean, we've got a few dedicated people that I'm not in charge of this. I consider everybody that's coming up with me to be on par kind of thing. I don't want to sound like I want to be in charge, but you're talking about a team. You've got medics, you've got all sorts of people, and are they having a different experience as individuals to some of the others in the team? Guess that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll read you some cases here. This gets all very weird, very quick.
Yeah, well, I'm expecting it to be honest.
We have one team member, after the 2017 experience with the portal, she was actually the videographer that caught the thermal, on her FLIR unit. And she, right after that, she started having dreams and feelings of orbs coming into her bedroom at night that eventually turned into beings in her bedroom at night. Now with the psychoanalyst, we're going to do some regression with that and dig into that a little bit deeper. But so she started becoming kind of a catalyst for really weird experiences. In July of 2021, we had, completed an expedition, and she was driving home, and we had other team members' vehicles acting very strange. We had alarm systems going on and going off. We had two team members trying to drive home, and their GPSs kept taking them back to the same place. And then while she was driving home, a different individual, her automobile lost all power in a remote area and wouldn't start. Now, what's interesting is, where have we heard about vehicles losing power? Well, probably the best example is a Level Land, Texas incident where you had multiple vehicles during that experience, losing power. So it's like typical, Betty and Barney Hill kind of stuff. Your vehicle just dies in the middle of nowhere. So she gets home, and we have even a stranger hitchhiker effect. Now, this one is kind of odd and a bit unnerving. Is she works in a profession where she works at night shift. So she got home, put her gear away, got cleaned up, and she the next day she was sleeping, and she had her iPhone sitting next to her on her bed, so she could hear it as it vibrated if somebody called or sent a message. Well, she happened to be going through some photographs that day on her gallery, and she noticed a photograph that she did not take in her photo gallery. And it was of an open field with power lines running across it, which was not the meadow. The meadow is very remote, has no power lines, but it was another open field. And so she quickly queried all the team members, hey, did anybody send me this? And nope, nobody sent it to her. Does this ring any bells? No. I said, hey, send me the file. I'll see if I can find some metadata or exfil data in it, and maybe, come up with something like that. No data, on the photograph at all. And the photograph was time-stamped while the phone was within 18 inches of her head. So the phone never left her, possession. So somebody found something that matched that photograph, and it happened to be a real estate listing for a parcel of land not too far from where she lives. And it was the exact same photograph. Now, she had not been looking to purchase any land. She doesn't have any referrals from real estate agencies, but somebody was actually able to find the link to the real estate listing.
Right.
And,
okay.
And I was able to pull that up, and I still have that real estate listing. And so, we always wonder, we couldn't get a team fast enough to go out to this field, and it was on private property. So we have to respect that. And so was that a message, saying, hey, we're going to be here, come interact with us, or what? So, we really don't know exactly what that was about, but it was a very strange, the hitchhiker phenomena, when you think you really understand it, like I've had things, disappear off my desk and then reappear, when you think it's something, and I'm going to say mundane, but that's pretty common.
Yeah.
You get thrown a loop, you get thrown a real curveball, and the experiences are way outside of what you expected.
What I'm not expecting you to know this, Trey, but what do you think the hitchhiker phenomena is? Do you think it's something? Well, the phenomena, we keep saying the phenomena, and I'm as guilty as everybody else. So we just don't have the vocabulary most of the time to describe most of what we're experiencing. Yeah. But do you think it's something within it that attaches itself to an individual, or is it as simple as, if we concentrate enough after we've been in these locations, has had these experiences, then obviously its eyelids flicker and it recognizes that we're kind of connecting with it?
I think so. I think, once you go into an area of high strangeness and you've demonstrated a willingness to share an experience with, the others, I think it's like, okay, now you're a marked man. We know that, you can talk to us. And I think it might just simply be attempts at communication. Attempts at communication.
It's okay.
Outside of normal means.
Do you need a drink?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay. So right, so we've touched on the hitchhiker phenomena, and has any other members of your team experienced that, or is it just this lady who's had the dreams? And
Yeah, mostly her. She's had quite a few experiences. I do have another team member that had she was back at her home after one of the expeditions, and her son he was about a toddler, about 3 years old at the time, was kind of goofing around on their elliptical exercise machine, and he stopped and he pointed up in the air and he said, "Ball, ball." And his parents looked up and didn't see anything, but they took their camera, because they were filming him kind of goofing around, and went up there, and on the camera you could see an orb that the child could perceive, but the adults could not. So, and that was right after the portal or cube experience of one of our team members. So, yeah, we've had many experiences. I was going to show you a photograph I think you might kind of enjoy that happened to me. This is something that I found literally 30 meters from my back door. And what that is...
the large print.
That's a large print, and that scale is 6 inches. So that gives you an idea of the size of that thing. Now, you look at different experiences. People talk about wolf-like creatures after experiencing high strangeness. So that's that falls right in line, not only with your experiences, and you talk about those in your film Wolfland, but also with Skinwalker Ranch and some other places. So
without a doubt, and that leads us nicely then to the cryptid phenomena. Can I hear birds tweeting? Is that...
Yeah, I have my door open.
That's good. Thought it was a phone. Just throw me that. Let me just think. What about the Bigfoot phenomena then, and what people would call the dogman stroke werewolf phenomena? Are you experiencing that in and around this location? So a double question here then. Do you see the light form phenomena in conjunction with these creatures, these beings?
Yeah, that's a great question. This area has a very rich history of Bigfoot sightings, and there is a folkloric big type of Bigfoot, which is described as a white hominid, like with white fur. We've actually seen that,
really
watching our base camp about 2 a.m. in the morning. And we have, done the typical thing where, we were out in the meadow. I was briefing a team, some new team members that were visiting, and in the background of the photograph, there was what appears to be a large hominid watching us, in the background. We've also captured on thermal, and this is where it gets a little weird, is a large hulking figure, with like a cone-shaped head, no neck, long arms, broad, huge shoulders, that was colder than the ambient temperature around it. So it was actually cooler and did not fit the thermal signature that you would expect of a large hominid. It was colder.
See this shape.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that is when you go and you look at ghost lore, is people talk about when spirits appear, the temperature drops. So, and also the cube or the box was colder than the surrounding area. So that's an indicator, it's when the temperature drops, or you feel a drop in the temperature, or you see a drop in temperature on your thermal, that could be an indicator that high strangeness of, many forms is getting ready to appear or manifest.
So obviously you're looking for the heat signature on the thermal, but as you've used thermals, I use a thermal. We can see other things as well. Some things that aren't throwing heat signatures out, but you can definitely see the shape of these perceived creatures, for want of a better word. And have you got? You've assuming you've got these on film as well, then, Trey? Yeah.
Yeah. I do. Let's see.
So, What are they then? If they're not throwing out an heat signature, are we talking about something that's slipping in and out of existence in your mind? I'm not asking you to give us definitive, but is that what you were thinking?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Is I think these beings, and John Keel, the wonderful John Keel, used a term ultra terrestrials.
Yep.
And in my book, I started using the term paradimensionals, that they're outside of our dimension. And I think these entities or creatures or whatever, as they're moving in and out of our dimension, that they somehow a signature or an indicator of that is a drop in temperature. And if you go back folklorically, you very seldom hear about folkloric ghost tales that happen in the tropics. It's always a cold, blustery day on the moors, or here in the U.S. it's an ancient, chilly, drafty Gothic house, something like that. And so there's something about coldness or a drop in temperature and the manifestation of these phenomena. And so we've started to rely on FLIR quite a bit, on thermals quite a bit. We've captured entities that are man-sized. I'm not going to necessarily say man-shaped, but maybe 2 meters tall, 1.5 meter, 1.75 meters wide, something like that, on thermals that do not correspond with the known location of any team members. Like I said before, we all carry radios. Once you're put on station, you don't move without permission from the person that's in tactical command of the field operation. So we always know where everybody is. And we have multiple instances of, thermal signatures being where people shouldn't be, that seem to be interested in what we're doing. So, there's something about heat or a lack thereof that is indicative of this phenomenon.
A few weeks ago, I'm with you on this, but we got probably the opposite. We got a large oval-shaped heat signature about a quarter of a mile away. And Jeremy, who was with us at the time, went towards it, and he's on the phone speaking to me saying, whereabouts is it? And I'm saying, and he's walking along, and I'm saying, you're in front of it. Got a torch. He's got a psionics camera. I can't see it. And we've got it on the thermal. Luckily, I've got Jeremy's phone conversation because we can hear that through his psionics. And we've got Paul's thermal. That it's not the smoking gun of ufology or paranormal, but it's an interesting bit of evidence. So that's not the opposite of what you've been saying, but we've got these strange things. What about? We'll go to questions in a few minutes, Trey, if that's okay. But what about? Because we've talked about the cold air. What about heat then? Just briefly, we've been in certain locations up on these cliff tops in the winter and experienced warm air blowing on us. This is the North Sea. This is a very cold environment. And it's not just one person saying, I just felt a waft of warm air. There's been 3 of us, Ian and Pete, and we felt this warm air hitting our faces. Have you experienced anything like that?
No, not exactly like that. Mostly it's been coldness in our experiences. Yeah.
Okay. Well, still, it's fascinating nonetheless. So maybe a bit of a random question, but when you go, do you go armed?
Yes.
Because we're not assuming that there's not just, we know we're looking for the unexplained, we're looking for the strange and unusual, but you must be in a location probably where there's mountain lions and bear, is there?
Yeah, here in the States, especially the area where this is, it's pretty, they're pretty open-minded on the carrying of arms. So you can pretty much carry whatever you want, semi-automatic rifle, pistol, revolver, whatever. And we do go armed. And I think that's really important because a lot of people say don't go armed because whatever it is will, detect your intent. Yeah, and that's not why we go armed, because there are bears, there are mountain lions, there are wild hogs, and the firearms are not to protect us against the phenomena. It's
people.
Yeah, well, strangely enough, this is another weird thing. This area is very strange and very tragic. Bodies are found there all the time, and about a year and a half ago, there was a murder by a cult that was camping in the forest. And, I've written to the authorities, did a Freedom of Information Act to say, hey, that campsite where the cult was, did you clear it out? Did you run the people off? Did you allow them to stay there? What's the status of it? No response. Okay. The authorities do not want to respond to my question. So, that's another thing is, unfortunately, the evil that lurks around us isn't from the phenomena, it's from our fellow man.
Yeah, I would agree for the most part on that. So do you, without, obviously you're not giving location away, and that's perfectly understandable, but do other people within the area, locality, know about it, or do you think that you and your team have stumbled on it simply because you went looking for cryptid, Bigfoot?
Right. I think that people, locals that I've talked to know the area is strange, and I hear all kinds of just bizarre, crazy stories coming from this area. But as far as I know, the locals have not, with laser focused on the meadow. But no. I do have to say that it's a region, and we have other research areas, like 10 miles away from the meadow that we'll go to, and we'll have fantastic UAP sightings and other type of phenomena going on in other places.
Does it go quiet then, Trey? Do you find that you've got weeks of relatively nothing?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We'll go out there and not have anything, and then it'll throw us a curveball, something we weren't expecting.
And that's enough to keep you hooked, isn't it? Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah, we do the same. I've got reams and reams of paper and reports, but they go back years and years and years. And I think people imagine that when you go to these locations, it's happening every night. And I would think that you could probably go for 6 months sometimes up here and nothing happens. But when it does, that's all we need.
Yeah, we do have some things that are our frequent flyers as far as phenomena. Is the disembodied voices are pretty common. The shadow people, in the edge of the meadow that you'll see, those are pretty common. And then flickering lights, in the woods, like orbs are pretty common.
So we'll go to questions in a moment then. So we'll just kind of remember about the shadow people, the lights, and then some of the new research, and we can cover that after the questions. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we'll see.
Happy to be here.
Well, honestly, Trey, it's brilliant. Thank you. Hi, Alice.
And brilliant show so far. And thanks for everybody being on the chat tonight. And we've got some good questions in. So I'll start off with a question. I know you've touched on this and you've told people what you think it is, Trey. And I'll put it on the screen now. Mark Jones is asking, does Trey think Bigfoot is an ape or something else?
Yeah, that's a great question. For a long time, I was in the Gigantopithecus camp. It was an undiscovered flesh and blood hominid. But based on our experiences, as recently as 6 months ago, it was an expedition that I was not able to go on. We're capturing on thermal, once again, these heat signatures that appear to be cryptids, but they don't present themselves in the heat spectrum as, flesh and blood. It's almost like just a few degrees warmer or cooler than the ambient temperature, but yet it's a figure. So I think there are certain aspects and certain instances of, what we call Bigfoot that might not be flesh and blood, or might be something coming in and out of, our existence, out of our world. And I think that the more people come out and actually talk about this, and many cryptozoologists are talking about this now, that we see orbs, we hear disembodied voices. There's more than just a giant monkey in the woods. There's a whole other veneer of high strangeness to the Bigfoot phenomena. So I think it's something else. I think there's another X factor to Bigfoot. Yes.
And does this explain why we don't find any skeletons, bones, scat, or anything like that?
Yeah, I know that there are some folks that will disagree with me on this, and I'm thinking of some of the big names now because I've heard them say so. But we don't find the bodies. We don't find the skulls. Now, one part of that is saying you don't usually find the bones and carcasses of large animals in the woods, like elk and bear and all that, because the creatures will eat the bones for the calcium. But the other side is, maybe these aren't creatures like we think they are. Maybe they do wink out of existence and get a other plane, to their demise or whatever. And that's why we're not finding bodies.
Okay, thanks for that, Trey. I'll just move on with another question. Fred Flintstone, is this phenomena, it's a good question, this one, is this phenomena human-centric? Would it exist without us?
That is a fantastic question. And I kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, is an experience without a human being to experience it? Yeah. It does. If a tree falls in the wood with nobody to hear it, doesn't make a noise, that analogy. I think that the human beings are multidimensional creatures. Okay. And that explains things that are quantifiable, like remote viewing, as studied by the U.S. military in the 80s, by the Stanford Research Institute, Defense Intelligence Agency, and these other folks, that human beings have an extra dimensional element to them. And I think that whatever this otherness is keys on that. And I think that a lot of these experiences would not necessarily be happening in a vacuum. And I don't know if, we're a catalyst, or it's trying to communicate with us, or we're, the best piece of research equipment you can ever take out in the field as a human being, that we're able to detect this stuff and experience it, that, it might not, quite frankly, be there, without a human interaction.
Okay, I've got a not so much a question, but Pendle Hill UFOs is saying, don't forget, what looks like a rectangular or square might be only our perspective of what we're seeing.
Absolutely. My personal theory, the more I get into this, is you have a multidimensional being, object, or whatever, and as different aspects of this object, drop into our 3 dimensions, is it will show a shadow of its multidimensional self reduced to 3 dimensions. And so one shadow might be like a Bigfoot, one shadow might be a ghost, one shadow might be a UFO. It might be a square, and I'll give you a perfect example of that. A cube inside of a cube with all the corners connected is called a tesseract, okay, or hypercube. A hypercube is a 3-dimensional shadow of a 4-dimensional object where all of those angles are right angles. Now, we can't conceive that because, we're limited by our Euclidean understanding of the 3-dimensional world. So, yeah, the manifestation of a rectangle or box is just our perspective of it. It's a representation or a shadow of a multidimensional object or happening.
And I'll just put this on the screen, and thanks for the donation from Tia. And Meadows, talk to me. So somebody on the same page with you, Trey, on that one. And as I say, thank you for the donation. And we've got not so much a question in this one as well, but a sighting. David Drummond, I remember seeing a box-shaped UFO when I was only 10, and my family was living in upstate New York around 1970. It was hovering over a tree, over the tree line where we were in my dad's car heading back home to Etna from Ithaca.
Ithaca.
That's it.
Ithaca. That's pretty common. The boxes or the cubes, historically, are relevant. They're very important to our folklore. And there's a very famous case here in the U.S. of the Carl Higdon UFO case and abduction. That was in the Oxbow National Forest in Wyoming here in the U.S. And he describes a translucent cube that he ran into while he was elk hunting, and that had a being inside of it that interacted with him. So the boxes and the cubes, I think, are significant. Now, how they are significant,
we've just lost Trey for a moment.
or
just remember
about that shape.
And what's interesting as well, there's nothing aerodynamic about the cube.
No.
And that's where science and academia would say, well, this thing couldn't possibly fly. How could this maneuver and traverse? But we don't have an answer to it, but there's so many people reporting similar things. We've got a sphere, a bubble, a transparent bubble reported at Exthorpe Flats in Doncaster with a being inside it near a children's school. I'm still after more information on that, and it's questions. I'm rambling. Go on, Les.
Okay, and no more questions on that line, apart from a question to you, Paul, from Jackson Hilsey. Paul, you had a problem with your car alarm a few years ago. What's that in respect of, Paul?
I'm not so sure. I think I know where Jackson's coming from with this, and thanks for that, mate. Myself and Bob Brown had been to the cliff tops, what we would call the equivalent of Trey's Meadow. We'd been to these unusual cliff tops where strange things happen. And when I came back, I have a Honda CRV car, fairly good alarm on it. And when I came back, it was a freezing cold night. Gets in the car, Bob jumps in the passenger seat, and I've got a thing about people leaving seatbelt out. Well, I think everybody has. When you shut door and it bangs and they've left it in, and it just kind of damages your paintwork. And I sort of went, Bob, be careful. And he looked, and he'd not done it. So I said, oh, no worries, mate. And we reversed out, and then it felt cold as we're driving, and the passenger window was fully down. So we assumed that when Bob went to shut the door, he'd touched the electric window and it had gone down. Can't happen, because you only need to leave the window down half an inch on an Honda, on this one anyway, and the alarm will go off if you leave it for any length of time. So that was that. Puts the window up. That was unusual. We're driving along. Suddenly, I feel cold on my neck, and the window behind me, the passenger seat behind me, was halfway down. So we've got a car that's got a good alarm system, all fully electric, heated seats, everything. No alarms have gone off, and we've come back after a night up on these cliff tops, and the passenger window's fully down, and the front passenger and the back window's halfway down. I'm assuming that's what you mean, Jack. And if it isn't, I apologise, because otherwise I can't remember. But it was a strange one. I don't know how that could have happened. So there you go.
Yeah. No more questions for now. So I'll disappear until later on.
Okay, then. So where were we? Shadow beings. And we want to touch on your new findings and what you're looking into now. And we never touched on the book, when we need to do that. I think Les will be doing it anyway, but I can't recommend this book enough. The Meadow Project, Trey Hudson. Where can people get that?
Yeah, it's you can go on Amazon and just type in Trey Hudson or the Meadow Project, and it will pop up. You can also go to my website, which is treyhudsonresearch.com, and I have a link on that to get the book also.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I need to say, I've not been paid to say that, I've got this book. It's not been sent from America. It's excellent. It's well worth reading.
Well,
so
thank you.
The shadow beings and other strange phenomena that you've witnessed there. Give us some more information on that then, please, Trey.
Yeah, the shadow beings are pretty common. We are continuously seeing shadow beings, in the periphery of the meadow, and you'll see them running and standing and all of that. And we had kind of a disturbing account, and this is a really strange one. This was in October of 2022. A independent filmmaker who had been doing Bigfoot films started looking at incidences of high strangeness and asked if they could film an expedition with us and use that as a session in their upcoming film. I mean, of course, I said, fine, just, you got to sign this NDA and don't give it away. So anyway, we kind of became, friends with this production crew. And in October 2022, the director, who was there with his cinematographer and his PA, his production assistant, he wanted to do an SD session. And so that's what we did, is we hooked him up with the SD stuff. And, we're asking questions, and, a lot of strange stuff came out of that SD session that I'm still trying to decipher.
SD session for anybody?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that was the thing with the ghost box and the headphones and
the
blindfold. And so I got an email from him, a message from him later on. And he said, hey, my cinematographer and my production assistants will never be coming back out with me to the meadow. And I'm like, why? He says, they're scared. It's frightened them. And so I said, well, tell me a little bit more about it. And this is a direct quote from him. This is a message he sent me, and I quote, so I've been able to speak with others about what they saw. It was reported while the Estes event was in process, a shadow, nearly invisible being would hover around me. It would appear to try to enter me and come back out. This happened several times and eventually went into me and either didn't come out or vanished. All I remember from the event is images of destruction and these weird images of dead babies covered in blood. The shadow being was reportedly somewhat humanoid with a partial body, and the head of the being was said to resemble a person wearing a hood. It would seem that what they saw does correlate with what others have seen when they describe shadow people.
So there's nothing good coming out of that then?
Yeah, it was a very odd Estes session, and I still haven't transcribed it yet. But it was he had not only the responses to my questions, is he had very vivid imagery. And this gentleman's he's an engineer. He's not some tramp you find on the side of the road.
So were your questions leading him down a dark path?
No, I never go down a dark path.
No, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, no.
That's the response, and that's the reaction he was getting then. So that leads me then to think: does these unknown others, this phenomena, does it scare or warn people away that it does not want to interact with?
That's a great question. I think that it's reflecting the nature of humanity, which unfortunately is very violent and tragic, more often than not. I'm just thinking about some of the conflicts going on right now, which are very tragic. Do you think
that's a reflection of him and the way his mind worked? And I don't mean anything dark and sinister.
No, he's not a dark or morbid person at all. He's a very cheerful and energetic and effervescent type of person. So that was really weird, when he was describing this imagery, and then it coincides with two members, a cinematographer and his production assistant, both seeing this shadow thing trying to come into him. And he had also mentioned that they saw shadows, standing around us. So that am I going to put a black X of negativity necessarily in these shadow beings right now? No, I'm not.
No.
I think that maybe they're showing us a reflection of ourselves, which can be bad, it can be negative. But that's about the only direct interaction we've had with the shadow people. Usually they just stay on the periphery.
And they're on the periphery of the forest.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll not give the location away because myself and Les are working on another documentary, and he'll remember date I can't, but I think it was late last year. He can come in and correct me in a bit, but we went into the forest in North Yorkshire with a group of people who'd agreed to share their story, their account of shadow beings that they went out wild camping. One of them teaches bushcraft, and they're familiar with the forest, and they're not just frightening themselves. They didn't go out sort of just for screams and beers in the night. And during the setting up of the camp, daytime, all of them, but none of them spoke about it, were seeing in the peripheral things moving between the trees, daytime. And then one of them, we'll just call him Paul, that's his name, and we're going to be using the real names because they've agreed to do this. But, I know what Les is like. He'll not want me to give too much away. But one of them, he just said to his friends, I'm going to sound crazy here, but has anybody noticed anything strange? Has anybody... And then they all chirped in, and everybody within the group, I think there were 4 or 5 of them, we've got to film 3 of them, had seen and experienced it. So much so that during the night, one of them actually, he said, I felt the hand of something that sat around the fire grab my collar, and he said I could even feel a bony knuckle, and it pulled me backwards. And he says, I sort of screamed out loud, but they didn't feel fear. He said it were almost, he says, apart the shock, obviously then the shock would have hit him, but afterwards they realized that it were almost inquisitive, whatever they felt, whatever this phenomena or whatever it is wanted from them. So I don't know. It might be remarkably similar to what you're dealing with there.
Oh, it is. You mentioned Katie Page earlier. She's been out to the meadow several times. And the first time she came out, she came with a traveling companion. And there were two areas that we were researching that are probably half a mile from the meadow. And this is going to sound melodramatic, but we had to call these areas something. We call it the Field of Dreams and the Field of Nightmares. There were two fields, similar to the meadow, but much, much smaller, maybe a quarter of an acre, and maybe an eighth of a mile apart. And Katie's traveling companion had something grab the back of his jacket by the hood and pull on it.
Right.
And then another team member, Jessica, and we call it the great bohonkus incident, like bohonkus meaning your rear end, as something came up under her chair and grabbed her rear end.
Really?
But there was nothing
almost
around.
Playful, isn't it?
And what gets really weird is the area where that happened. If you remember in the very first part of my book, I talk about the strange entity that I saw when I was backpacking, walking along the trail in the middle of the night. That was 300 yards from where these people were grabbed, right. that location. So, it's, that like I said, the phenomena is evolving. Now we're actually being touched, which is kind of exciting.
So obviously you've got the meadow, then now you've just broke into a few other locations around the affected area. So do you find that certain types of unexplained phenomena are occurring in certain areas, or does it just not matter? It bleeds through into them all?
Yeah, the only area that we've had somebody grabbed was at the Field of Nightmares. That's the only place where people have been physically touched. Now, the SD session with the film director was actually at base camp. And now the shadow people, when we were out there last time a few months ago, I was there, got there early and met up with one of our team members who's a former Marine and retired out of law enforcement. And he, during the day, while we were sitting there talking around the campfire, he kept seeing small shimmering apparitions, maybe 3.5 feet tall, running from tree to tree, in your peripheral vision. So, it's, the phenomena, isn't just linked to the meadow. It's all around that region, and you really don't know what it's going to throw at you at any given time.
It's crazy. What do you think its agenda is? What do you think it wants? If anything, do you actually think it's into? This might sound stupid after everything that you've just said and everything that I'm looking into, but do you think it actually considers us that much, or is it just going about its business?
That's a great question. An analogy I use is, let's say you have a sidewalk, in a neighborhood, and part of it's broken, and the municipality, the city, or the council, or whoever sends workmen to fix it. So they tear up the old concrete, they pour new cement, and they're troweling out the cement to make it smooth. And a small boy, maybe about 6-year-old, comes up and is standing right there watching them do their work. And he's a typical precocious child, jabbering, incessantly. And the workmen have several choices. Is they can ignore the child and continue on with whatever their task or mission is, or they can maybe be polite and interact with the child, or they can scare the child off so they can focus on what they're doing. I think this otherness, these paradimensionals have a task and a mission. Now, whether that task or mission has anything to do with us, I venture to guess. So they can either entertain us and interact with us just out of maybe kindness or curiosity. They can completely ignore us, or they can scare us off so they can finish their task. Now, one thing I have noticed since I got into this, this field, is I don't have answers. And quite frankly, I don't even know what a lot of the questions are. I'm just, fumbling around, metaphorically in the dark like everybody else.
How many people have you come across from the scientific community that probably don't want to put their head above the parapet, but have you had anybody express an interest and ask questions with a real inquisitive mind, rather than I'm going to tell you that it's all in your mind, Trey, and everybody that's experiencing it?
Yeah, I've actually had some, pretty big names, start talking about this stuff a little more candidly, that, this phenomena is so wide ranging that you can't discount it anymore. And I think something that has really helped is, and of course, it's a television show, it's a production, take that for what it's worth. But, shows like the Secret of Skinwalker Ranch, where some of these other experiences are looked at and they're taken seriously by, credentialed scientists. They don't give the answer, but they look at it seriously and they respect the individuals having these experiences, I think is encouraging, and I think that now we have to start looking at it, and we have to start taking things like quantum physics into account. We have to maybe start looking at quantum effects might not always be on the micro scale. They might also be happening on a macro scale, which would explain some of this phenomena. And, I think it's just a wonderful, fantastic, and amazing time to be in this business. I mean, it's I think we're at a renaissance, in research of high strangeness, and I'm just excited to be part of it.
It is fabulous. I've got a scientist, eminent scientist, who keeps, he's not got no answers, but he's interested enough to keep, he sends me little tips and keeps me on track so that I don't sound absolutely wacko, because he realizes that we're onto something. I've no other way of saying that, Trey. But look, jumping back to the meadow, have you ever felt extreme fear?
No, not fear per se. Is I have had feelings of unease.
When you're alone or in a group?
Both. Right. Now we, since the missing time, situation with the one individual, we have a protocol that nobody goes out there by themselves. And no. I had a case where we had a radiation spike. I had extreme disorientation. I mean, like, I didn't know where I was. And if it wasn't for another team member being with me, I could have ended up like one of David Paulides, missing 401 people. You
must be reading my mind, because that was going to be my next question. Do we have a region where people have gone missing?
Yeah. It's I can't. One of the FOIA requests, Freedom of Information Act requests I made to the authorities are, how many people have gone missing in this area? Once again, crickets. In which that's common, at least here in the States, is Paulides has experienced that. Working with the authorities, they just don't want to talk about it. But I know from my personal experience is we had, I left an area, with my team member, and we got separated by some heavy vegetation, and I ended back up where I started, but it did not look the same. It was, and this is going to sound weird, and I'm sorry, but it's like it was a different location. And, I was excited about this location because it looked like it had research potential. And I called over to my teammate through the vegetation. I said, hey, come over here and look at this. This is a really cool area. Might be worthy of research. And when she got there, she's like, what are you talking about? You're right where you started. I'm like, no, we're not. And I've been to this area probably 70 times. And, I'm not meaning to, sound conceited, but I'm a pretty good woodsman. I've hunted all over the world and backpacked and all of that. So I'm pretty comfortable in that environment. And as she talked me down, it's almost like the environment changed and morphed back into something I recognized. And I was so disoriented that I told, my team members, of course, they got concerned back at base camp and they were wanting to send a medic out to me. And I said, just give me about 10 minutes, and if I promise, if I don't feel right after 10 minutes, send the medic. But, just give me a moment to kind of get my wits back about me. And what's really interesting, and we're seeing this in other areas, is at that time we had a radiation spike on our Geiger counter. The background radiation is usually about 0.06, 0.07 microsieverts per hour. And at that moment, it spiked up to 0.33 microsieverts per hour. Now, that's something that we've seen is at incidences of high strangeness, we'll see these radiation spikes. And what's also interesting is recently, about a year ago when we went out, we brought a set of dowsing rods, and we had our Geiger counter set on the ground. And with the dowsing rods, are you here? Do you want to communicate? No and yes. And it's like, if you're here, can you make this machine spike to 0.13 microsieverts per hour? And it did, exactly at 0.13 microsieverts per hour, which I quickly took a photograph of that. So, radiation seems to be, some part of the essence of this.
Yeah, I was going to say, but that kind of stamps on what I was thinking. Do you think that's, and I don't mean you're imagining it or I am, do you think that in some part it's working with our minds more than the actual reality of what we're seeing? If it's got the ability to talk into our mind, some part of this unexplained phenomena, the mind speak, well, what's to say that it can't put the visual out?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, I talked about it earlier that human being, our mind is not necessarily that gray squishy thing inside of our skull. The brain is a multidimensional organ. Okay. It can exist in other dimensions. It can perceive other dimensions. That's how we do remote viewing. And I was trained as a remote viewer. And so, what seems like, woo is reality. That's a mechanism, that's a modality that it can use to communicate us by using the extra dimensional part of our mind, which we interpret in this three-dimensional, world and understanding as mind speak. But perhaps, in the other dimension, it's as common and as reasonable as you and I having a conversation.
So I've heard you say you follow the folklore.
Mm-hmm.
So how far back have you gone, and how far do you think this just goes back before the written word, before even verbally sort of passed on these things? It's always been here. It's not new.
I think so. I went back to Native American lore, First Nations lore, and there's a lot of really strong folklore in that. In this region, if you go out west, that's where the whole term skinwalker came from. That's from Native American lore.
Yeah.
And so it's like these areas had a strange essence to it. Now, the area here in the southern United States is a lot of Scots-Irish. And so you go back into the Scots-Irish folklore, and you have jack-o'-lantern, will-o'-the-wisp, the fae. You have a very rich folklore of that high strangeness. And I think that a lot of times those were just labels that were brought over here, to North America. And it was just another label put on a phenomena that's always existed.
Yeah, I would agree. We kind of, just like religion, we're probably all praying to the same thing, and we're probably all looking at the same thing, just through different eyes and different cultural beliefs and upbringings, aren't we? So after all this then, Trey, after the Meadow project and the book, what has happened profound or really sort of eye-opening since this initial research?
Yeah, probably the greatest thing is getting to talk to people like you that are researching other areas of high strangeness. And I'm finding out that there are some very striking commonalities, in the high strangeness. And you have orbs, you have shadow people, you have disembodied voices, you have missing time. Sometimes people will see shapes. UAPs are very common in these areas. So there's almost a template, that you can lay on top of these areas of high strangeness. Now, the cool thing is if you really start doing your research, you can look for indicators and you can track these things down yourself, and your listeners, if they start digging into, the research and the reports of high strangeness, multifaceted high strangeness, they might find one of these areas in their own backyard. You know, that's just right for them to research, so they can go out and investigate and research and experience.
Do you think we should be cross-referencing? I think we should.
Yeah, I think we should.
The location, without giving the location away, just if things were happening, it would be good. If all these areas, and like you've just said, the listeners, probably there'll be some people that actually know about the areas, but they're just not vocal. They're just not, but there might be a knock-on. Think something could happen here, and there might actually be patterns, or there will be patterns. But everybody seems to be clinging to their own little section of the strange without sharing it. And I'm not labeling you, Trey. But because that's how it appears to me. UFO researchers, they get a report and they don't want to. I don't want to share that witness, and I don't want to do this. It's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it's it's kind of a double-edged sword, and I'll give you an example. I worked as a MUFON field investigator for a while, and when citizens report sightings or experiences to MUFON, it's done in confidentiality. Yeah, and that's an understanding. As if you report something to MUFON, it will be kept in confidence, and they have a big database called the CMS, or Case Management System. And the case management system is only accessible by credentialed field investigators for MUFON, nobody else. And so field investigators, we are obligated not to share that, with anybody else. So it really kind of keeps that locked in. Yeah. But I think what is valuable is looking at commonalities, and the natures of the experience and the phenomena, and looking at it from a more holistic view. And I'm working on my second book now, and the first part of it is going to be called Congruences. And what I do in that chapter is I take a look at some of the lesser known areas of high strangeness here in the U.S. I talk about the Colorado Ranch, with Katie Page. I talk about Marley Woods, and I talk about the Bradshaw Ranch. And I look at similarities, in some of the strange phenomena that's going on there, and you start to see a pattern develop pretty quickly, that can start to be an overlay for other locations.
And do you have certain months then where things are more prevalent? Not really, or
no, they seem to be hit and miss. I know in our case is usually our most active time is during the winter. But the reason for that is because the vegetation is off of trees and the brush, and we can see further. Yeah. And the ambient temperature is a lot colder, so something that would be more stark on thermal, would be a greater contrast. And we don't have as many people in the area, that might stumble across our research. This time of year, the vegetation is very thick. You can't see. At the edge of the meadow, you probably can't see 2 meters inside to the brush line.
Really thick vegetation. So, what about instances of equipment failure? I know you talked about the erased kind of memory cards and data, but what about drainage of batteries?
Tons of that. I've actually had equipment, that I will check out, in base camp, make sure it's fully charged before we go out to the meadow. It doesn't work. I'll say a bunch of naughty sailor words out there and stomp around, come back. Equipment works fine. I talked about having a film crew that came out with us. So the cinematographer, director, and production assistant came out with us to the meadow. And there was an area, about 6 meters in diameter. And what was very interesting is when the cinematographer would be outside of that area, his camera, and it's a professional grade camera. It's not something you'd buy from the five and dime. It was a very expensive piece. Yeah. He's a professional cinematographer, and his battery on his camera would show 80%. If he would step into this area, this circle, it would drop down to 20%. If he stepped out, it'd go back up to 80. And, we've had multiple instances of one time we were out there, and I personally had 2 radios fail too, because I carry a primary and a backup. Yeah. And something was messing with our comms, so we weren't able to communicate. So I had to meet up with another team and get one of their spare radios so we could continue to communicate. So yeah, that's very common, extremely common. We've had one, I can't remember the nomenclature, but it was a high-end FLIR unit die, get completely fried. We've had 2 drones get fried. So yeah, equipment failures, are really common.
And for anybody that, I don't know, are rolling their eyes and saying, no, that can't happen. It can't show 80% and then suddenly show 20%. We went onto cliff tops, and Les was with me, and we were with a guy called Pete Masters. We'll call him electronics expert, and he really is. He knows his stuff. And he took a laptop out with him, a new laptop. When we say new, probably a month old. He'd got some electrical testing equipment, which he's looking for the 1.6 gigahertz. That's what we're looking for. And we found it at the Rudston Monolith, and everything's reading okay. And then suddenly, I think we ended up on the cliff tops at Bempton. Les might jump in a bit, and he might just be able to remember a bit more about this. But the battery was, because we've not got it on constantly. We're only there for 10 minutes at Rudston doing this filming. The batteries, it were literally down to something like 20-25%. We went to Speeton, and it were back up to 90%.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work? And it really did. I don't know if Pete's in chat. I know he sometimes does, but that's what happened. So, when you're talking like this, there's going to be people there going, oh, yeah, of course it did, Trey. But yeah. I totally believe you, because that's happened to us, so it absolutely, I don't know, fascinating. So what about people like Jim Segala, who's worked at Skinwalker Ranch? You'll be familiar with Jim. Well, he's developing some equipment which is placed at Skinwalker. I think he has anyway, and he's also put some at is it the Mount Wilson Ranch?
Mount Wilson.
Are you considering reaching out and?
Yeah, I've reached out to some of the researchers at Mount Wilson. I don't know Jim. I know another. I'm trying to think what I can say on this. I do know another researcher that has developed some pretty exciting stuff that may or may not have been used in the Skinwalker Ranch show. And I'm in communication with this fellow. And the thing is logistics and money. Going out. The United States is a very large area. Yeah. And so. I'm trying to save my doubloons. My youngest daughter just got married 2 weeks ago, and she wanted the full meal deal. So I'm a little short of funds right now.
I can understand. We had Jim on a few weeks ago, and he's got this equipment. And I said, I want one of these units. Yeah, maybe 2. And then Peter, the guy we've just been talking about, and he says, I can make this. We can get this. We can do it. So we're probably going to go down that route. No disrespect to Jim, because it's absolutely brilliant work that he's doing. Absolutely. So what about, you touched on the disembodied voices earlier. And because I realize we've probably only got 15, 20 minutes left. What do you hear? Is it a conversation, or is it just words? Is it a collective that's hearing these voices?
It's kind of weird. Is it they're not really intelligible, and you can hear them very plainly with the naked ear, but they're hard to record, which is, I don't understand the dynamics of that. But sometimes it'll be like a male voice and a female voice in areas where there aren't any people. Because like you mentioned in your lecture, is you can bring your thermal up, and if there's somebody there, you can see them. They can't hide from a thermal. So sometimes we'll hear male and female voices. Sometimes they'll be like a normal pitch. Other times they'll be very low and grumbly. And what those remind me of, I don't know if you're familiar with Ron Moorhead's the Sierra sounds.
I have heard them. Yeah.
Okay, and that kind of what he called samurai chatter, that kind of that kind of vocalization. We've heard that, and we've had people hear disembodied voices at camp. Like coming from above them, which that's pretty common in the folklore, is people hearing disembodied voices. So
what? So we'll jump from the disembodied voices. So what were the moon-eyed people?
Yeah, the moon-eyed people We've never encountered those, but that was supposedly I'm not going to use the word race. That's probably not the right descriptor, but a group of people that, in the American Southeast and remote areas that, had large eyes. Sometimes they're linked to the black-eyed children. So there's been a lot of theories about that. People, some people say, yeah, well, I visited the moon-eyed people with my grandfather, back in the 60s or whatever. And, there's, some speculation that it's a very insular, inbred community of backwoods people, and, frankly, that does exist,
And is this in a similar location to where you're doing your research?
I have not heard specifically of the moon-eyed people in our location, but I mean, within 150 miles, there's, reports of it.
Okay.
Yeah, the American Southeast is a strange place.
Yeah. So, as you said right at the beginning, you kind of set out within the unexplained, looking at the ghosts and the spirits. So you've talked about shadow type beings in this location. You've talked about Bigfoot type or shapes of that kind of entity or being.
Mm-hmm.
What about ghostly types of apparitions? Actually, what we would perceive as a deceased human. Have you seen that?
Yeah, we have. And, the folklore is certainly there for that. And that's what, brought us into this area was the talk of a haunted road with the spirits that would line the side of the roadway. The scrape on your car and all of that. We didn't find that. But what we have found, especially with thermal, is I talked about it earlier, seeing the man-sized heat signatures, in multiple areas that didn't correspond to, known team members. Now, if you look at your perspective, if a ghost researcher was looking at it, they'd say, well, that's obviously dead Uncle Fred.
Yeah.
Now a ufologist said, no, that's an alien. Cryptozoologist would say, well, it's like a juvenile Bigfoot. Well, what if it's all of those things and none of those things? It's what label we put on it. So, I am always challenging myself to not use labels, because labels are limiting. Now, sometimes I do use terms like portal because that's a reasonable description and people can understand what I'm talking about. But that's something that has, really contributed to this very, very fragmented approach to, the research of high strangeness is, really hanging your hat on a specific label on a phenomenon.
Yeah.
So, what I tell my team is, take the phenomena for what it is. Just report what you see and experience, and be careful about labels because that can be quite limiting.
Yeah, you're spot on the cliff tops. Here we have a sphere of white light that's been reported. It's kind of tennis ball sized.
Mm-hmm.
At a stand, there's a stand that's purpose built to look out to sea called Big
Mm-hmm.
Railings. And they call it the ghost of Big Railings. And the rock anglers, the guys that stand on the edge of these 300 to 400 foot cliffs fishing,
mm-hmm.
unbelievably, and the fish off the edge of these sheer drops. But they say they've seen the ghost of Big Railings. And I mean, very, very sparsely, but it's talked about over decades. And they think it's the headlamp of a fisherman. But they're only reporting a sphere of light.
Right.
Do but that's their perception of what they're looking at, Trey. Likewise, the ghost in Danes Dyke, the woodland that's pretty close, the White Lady.
Mm-hmm.
The people I've spoke to talk about they've seen the White Lady, and when you get to the actual meat of the story, they've seen a sphere of light passing through the trees. So it's everybody's, like you've just said, everybody's perception. So without labeling any UFO organizations,
mm-hmm.
do you think some good cases and good evidence has been overlooked because it's not fitted into the UFO criteria? So there's been an incredible sighting of a UFO, and then somebody says, oh, by the way, there is something odd as well. I saw this strange creature.
Yeah,
and that kind of gets omitted. Has that happened?
Yeah, that happens. And I talked about earlier, my dad buying the book, Gods of Aquarius, which is really interesting because back then, people were a bit open-minded. This is a book about UFOs, but yet, they show Bigfoot in there.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
and different type of creatures. Ian Brad Steiger talks about, ghosts and Marian apparitions and things like that, all under the big umbrella of kind of high strangeness. So I think that people have a very strong normalcy bias, and oftentimes that normalcy bias, people have a lot of emotional capital invested in their belief system.
Yeah.
And if there's something that challenges that, they undergo a kind of a very tiny existential crisis, like, oh, I've been researching UFOs all these years, and now you're telling me that I've got to consider Bigfoot as part of ufology. I've done all this research and that doesn't fit in with what I believe. And I don't want to have a lack of self-worth. So I'm just going to ignore that. And I'll give you a case in point.
Please do.
Is a very well-known Bigfoot researcher was working with a group, and I'm not going to say which group it is because I don't want to, cast stones.
No.
But they were researching a very, very active area, Bigfoot. And they were experiencing orbs and disembodied voices and things like that. And so this Bigfoot researcher reached out to me and he said, hey, you have experience, in researching this, this multifaceted type of stuff. Would you like to come, into this area and you apply some of your techniques to it and see if we can maybe get a more holistic idea of what's going on? So the researcher posed this question to the head of their Bigfoot research group and the person that had control over this piece of property. And it was like, absolutely no way do we want those ghost and fairy people coming out here, looking at this, because all of that is a bunch of crap.
So my mind's made up and I'm not changing it.
Yeah. And I, regardless of what's happened, and I've been, as I've been presented with, I just don't want to believe that, because I have so much emotional capital believing that the Bigfoot phenomena is only a large hominid running around North America. And I do not want to believe anything else.
That's good, great example. I think, we've probably, I don't know, got 10 minutes left. And I'm hoping we might have a few questions, Trey, if you're good for that. And
yeah, absolutely.
And Les, have we got some questions?
Well, I've got this from Gary OK, and it comes back to the shadowy figures that you was talking about earlier, Trey. So I had a few, I think, probably accounts of these or interactions with these shadow figures. No one else was in the house. At the time, my name was whispered, but there was no one at home. And had that getting pushed down into my mattress, no one at home. So that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. First of all, Gary, I like your avatar. It matches my poster back there.
Believe, yeah.
That's I think people have, throughout the ages, seen things in the periphery of their vision. And the rods and cones of your eyes function differently, and you can perceive certain things with more acuity out of your peripheral vision. The disembodied voices is very common. Now, the getting pushed down into your mattress, that can be two things. Number one, that could be an actual experience, something pushing you down on the mattress. The second thing is there's a phenomenon called hypnopompic dreaming. Okay. And it has to do with sleep paralysis. And a lot of times that will manifest in a way of people feeling like there is an oppressive force on their chest. That's where the incubus and succubus comes from. And it's as your body transitions from, from awareness to sleep. And another part of that is they have this pressure on their chest that they will see a black figure that exudes pure malevolence. And it's absolutely horrifying. I've experienced that before. And the only way I was able to kind of work my way out of it is I understood the phenomena. And I'm not saying that's an explanation. I'm saying that's a possible explanation. So that would be definitely worth looking into is hypnopompic dreaming or sleep paralysis. The shadow figures. Yeah. I think that there are things winking in and out of our existence all the time. And, I think they just leave residue of their passing. And I think sometimes, their passing may not have anything to do with us. They're just going from point A to point B.
Yeah.
And your name being whispered, there are a lot of different theories on that. That could be I believe that we go to another plane of existence, another dimension. Many people believe that we can influence the living, by speaking to them, either audibly or other means. So that could be that too.
It implies intelligence, though, doesn't it? The name being whispered, and it implies more than in some instances. I know that you'd throw all that out as possibilities, but it implies that there's more than just passing through with this guy's account. If something's whispering his specific name.
Yeah, I would be interested to know if all of these things happened at one time or if they were isolated events.
Okay. Yeah. So there's just one thing I want to ask you, Trey. And
don't buy him a drink, Trey. Be asking for a beer.
Buy me a drink.
Buy you a drink. And you said you trained as a remote viewer. Now, a remote viewer, for the uninitiated, for the unaware, for the layman, can you tell us a little bit about what a remote viewer is involved in, and what is the process of becoming a remote viewer? If you can go into probably a little bit of that, Trey, that might be useful to our audience tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of people throw the term remote viewer around, but originally what remote viewing was, it was a military protocol. Ingo Swann and some others helped develop it initially for the U.S. Army Intelligence and Security Command, and it was basically taken over by the Defense Intelligence Agency and the CIA later. But it is the only thing I'm trained in is something called coordinate remote viewing. And what it is, it's a way of taking this ability that everybody has and following a very strict sets of steps and protocols where and it's hard to explain, but you engage your mind in following the protocol, and it opens up a liminal window into eternity, if you will. And because even in quantum physics, everything that is, was, or will exist exists now in a quantum state. And it's a way of training your mind to reach into that quantum state and pull data out by going through a very specific set of protocols and steps. And people that are very good at this, and I'm okay at it, but people that are very good at this can be given a set of 8 digits, and that's why it's called a coordinate remote viewing. The digits don't mean anything; they're random. But it's a way of engaging the conscious part of your mind and following a set of tasks while allowing the unconscious part of your mind to reach out into, the matrix is what they call it, and pull data. And it can be anything from, events, people, the famous kidnapping of General Dozier by the Red Army faction during the Cold War. Remote viewing was used with success to help find him. It's used in myriad missing person cases. I've worked a few of those, but it's not something that you can sit down and teach yourself. I literally went through a full summer of training. It was about 1 or 2 weekends a month, and it was like, get there on Friday evening, train all day Saturday, train half of Sunday, go home for a few weeks, and come back out to this remote farm where we were being trained. And so it's an amazing thing, and it solidified my belief and understanding that human beings are much more than this meat puppet that we drive around. We're so much more than that. And it also gave me a lot of encouragement that when we die, whatever dying really is we don't go away. We still exist in another dimension, which makes perfect sense, when you've gone through this kind of training and experience.
Great question, Les.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I know you talked about one instance of a measure of success of the remote viewing. So how quantitatively, what in a percentage term do you think that remote viewing has been successful, say, over the last 20, 30 years?
That's a great question. A lot of the objectives, actual real world objectives, are probably still classified because it was used for intelligence gathering. So, they're not going to tell you what their objectives are. I know that you can go and download a lot of remote viewing declassified documents from the CIA U.S. Army and the Stanford Research Institute. And I think they were showing, I'd have to go back and look at the documents, but I think they were showing about a 60 or 70% success rate. And that doesn't sound like a lot, but, I trained as an intel guy, intelligence guy years ago. And if I'm getting about a 50% success rate off of a type of intelligence, electronic intelligence, human intelligence, that's pretty damn good, because I'm going to use it I'm going to use it and back it up with other intelligence. I'm not going to take it at face value. So, I think scientifically it's significant. So, it convinces me that it, not only from my personal experience, but just from the research, that it's a very real and usable phenomenon.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think we've got the last question of the day, which I'm going to put on the screen. And by the way, thanks for that, Trey. That was a good insight to what the remote viewing entails. Gavin's still crazy. Hi, Trey. What do you ultimately want to get out of your investigations at the Meadow?
Oh, like Indiana Jones said, fortune and glory. No, I'm kidding. There's not a lot of money in this business. I'm just one of those people. I have a very inquisitive mind, and I'm not knocking people for taking interest in certain things, but I am not a sports guy. I don't particularly take a huge amount of interest in, American football. I do find some of the collegiate stuff interesting. I don't understand European football at all. So, I don't keep up with pop culture, but I have this big question mark, that just follows me around. Why? What if? How come? And so this is one of the last frontiers. Everybody watching this can go on their computer and go on the internet, and they can find out an approximation of Queen Elizabeth's shoe size, arcane data like that, because it's out there. So we think we know everything. We think we're so damn smart. But isn't it amazing? And isn't it exciting that there are mysteries out there? And who wouldn't want to be a part of that?
Absolutely.
So sign me up.
Yeah. So we're just about there. But if this year, next year, 10 years time, God willing, you found what would be irrefutable proof of something, would you actually disclose it to the world?
Yeah, I would. I mean, that's the whole reason I wrote the first book, and I'm working on the second book now, is I want people to read this stuff and make up their own mind. I am not the custodian of the truth. I'm not. I'm just a guy out there having experiences. And I think the more people that look at this stuff, they look at it critically, they look at it with an open mind, and they look at it with their heart and soul, we're going to get close to what the answer is. And Absolutely. I firmly believe the answer is that we are not alone. And the others might be more amazing and more elusive than we can even imagine.
On that note, I'm going to say thank you, Trey. That was just absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
That's it. So just as an ending of where people can find your Meadow projects, it's at the moment on Amazon, and you can buy it from your website as well, can they?
Yes. Yeah, TreyHudsonResearch.com.
Absolutely.
And Paul, have you got a few?
Yeah, I can recommend that. And if anybody wants to look for my books, the Truth Proof books, they're behind Les there, and there's 4 books, 1, 2, and 5 books. Apologies, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and The Night People, which is my own experiences. So, and Wolflands, which can be found on Amazon Prime, and I know you've looked at that, Trey. Okay. And all available, truthproof.uk. And Trey Hudson, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you.
Gentlemen, it's been an honor.
Yeah, and I've got just going to go through a couple of names here. Madeline Wick, Jojo, and TA, of course, all made contributions to the channel tonight, and thank you very much appreciated. And on that note, thanks to everybody for being on the stream tonight. Some great questions, as usual, and great support, which you always give, and we've got to thank everybody for doing that. On that note, we will see you on Sunday evening, and we'll see you all then. Good night.